Hello everybody, today I'll be painting up a Drukhari Wrack. As you can see, I started off with a base coat of Chaos Black from a rental can. I then, through an airbrush, applied a coat of earth, mainly focusing on all the skin of the model. You can do this by a brush if you don't own an airbrush, or if you prefer that. I just did this to speed it up a bit. Next, I made a mixture of 1 part earth and 3 parts elf skin tone, and I painted in the entire skin of the model with it. For this, the earth works as a color to get a smoother and better coverage on. Then I made a wash consisting of 2 parts red tone, 1 part purple tone, and 6 parts glaze medium from Vallejo, and I washed all the skin with it. Once that's dry, I made a mixture of 1 part earth and 4 part elf skin tone, and I applied a highlight working from the inside towards the outer side of all the raised areas on the skin. The previous wash will give the model a more lively color once the skin is done. This is then followed by a next highlight by adding 2 parts pale flesh to the previous mixture and basically repeating the previous process, leaving the earlier highlight stage visible, working towards the outside of the raised areas and strengthening the highlight effect. Then I took black and I painted in the pants of the model, and also the other weird dress thing it's wearing. Not quite sure how to call that. So I'm in this video gonna call it his dress. I then made a mixture of 1 part black and 2 parts anthracite gray, and I applied a really rough highlights to the pants. I nearly painted it completely in that color, just leaving the absolute deepest recesses untouched. This also had to do with the following stage. I was going to wash it with non-oil, so if the deepest parts are still black, it didn't really matter. They would turn black now anyway due to the wash. Next I made a mixture of 1 part black and 2 parts khaki, and I painted his dress with it. This took a couple of layers to get good coverage, and so it took some time, as you can see here. And in general, when I do this, I use pretty thin paint and just keep playing with it until I'm happy with the result. Then I went back to the pants and I made a mixture of 1 part black and 2 parts anthracite gray, and I applied a rough highlight with it, leaving the deepest recesses untouched. Here you see a mixture of 2 parts anthracite gray and 1 part white being applied, but I lost the footage of the in-between layer of pure anthracite gray, which follows the same procedure. Just work your way outwards from the deepest recesses towards the light and strengthen the previous highlights you applied. Then onto the dress, I made a mixture of 1 part black and 4 parts khaki, and I started strengthening the first highlight I've applied. I prefer to do this by drawing a line towards the most outer highlighted area, and then work towards that line from the inside of the model towards the outside. Basically, how you can see this is I apply an edge highlight and then I paint over the edge highlight. So I paint it on and then instantly strengthen it. Then the next layer I added 1 part white to that mixture, And I repeat this process, leaving the previous layer visible. And again, especially to the edges, I paint this on in several thin coats to build up the color. For the next step, I added 3 parts white to this mixture, and I repeated the process, leaving the previous layers visible. And again, as you can see, I start working on the edge and then go inwards and then outwards again on the model. And for the final stage of this part of the model, I added 4 parts white to the mixture. And now by really staying on the outside of the model, I strengthen the light effect on the edges. Because you're watching it still wet paint dry up a bit darker. You can continue this as much as if you want in these previous stages as well to get a more smoother effect. But if I would start doing that in videos, the videos would last like 1.5 hours each, and that's not interesting anymore. And next to that, this guy is planned to be at tabletop level. So then I took earth and I painted the weird bone thing on his back with earth. This is then followed by a wash of Airbrush for its shape. Then, using black, I painted in the face mask. Both face masks on this weird guy. And then I took abyssal blue, and basically what I did was I painted the upper left half of the helmet with it and the bottom right half of the helmet with it. I did this on both of the helmets. Then I made a mixture of 4 parts abyssal blue and 1 part pale blue gray. And I highlighted those pre-mentioned areas towards the light. So for the bottom part, this means towards the center, and for the upper part, it's towards the top. By then adding 1 part pale blue gray, I repeat this process, strengthening the color, leaving a little bit of the previous layer visible. So we get a transition in the color from light to dark. And for a final step on this part, I added 2 parts white to the mixture, and I draw a line in the middle of the helmet. Then back to the bone part, I made a mixture of 1 part earth and 2 parts bone white, and I applied a fairly rough first highlight to the bone thingy. It's not that big of a deal if you miss a part or if you do a bit too much. This is just the early stage, and we can clean it up and fix it up later on. So next I added 2 parts bone to this mixture, and I started strengthening the highlights all around, as you can see. Again, since it's such a weird structure on a, and it's an Xenos race, weird things can be happening on them, so don't be too fussed if you accidentally go a bit in the recesses or miss a high part. I try to stay on the most outer parts of the model whilst doing this. After the previous one, I applied the next highlight with bone, and then onto this layer, which is one part bone white and one part white, and I just apply this to the outer edges of the most outer parts of the model really quickly. So I wanted to add a bit of color because I found the model a bit dull, so I took Indian shadow and I blocked in these wristbands the model. Once that's dry, I took Airbrush crimson and I washed the wristbands with it. And once that's dry, I took Indian shadow and Warlord purple in a 4:1 ratio, and again I applied a fairly rough highlight following the shapes in the model, leaving the Airbrush crimson visible. By adding one part bone white to this mixture, I am now going to reinforce the highlights, building them up a bit from dark to light, going in several thin layers where needed. By reapplying the same light color over a dark color, you can strengthen the color layer by layer and make it more vibrant. And as a final highlight, I then added 2 parts white to this mixture, and as you can see here, I applied this in a more edge highlight way, only on the outside of the model, where the light would really fall. Then using desert yellow, I painted in the ropes on the model. I had a couple here, and the waistband it has. Once that's dry, I wash it quite heavily with Airbrush Earthshade. Make sure not to, especially under the waistband, not to go too much outside of it. On the ropes, I actually wanted to go spill a little bit over to get a shading effect. Once the wash is dry, I'll make a mixture of 1 part desert yellow, 1 part khaki, and I just highlight all the raised areas I can find on the waistband, and I highlight the ropes. Next, I add 2 parts bone white to this mixture, and I'm going to reinforce these previous highlights, leaving a little bit of the previous layer visible. And it's kind of important that you don't go into recesses on this one. You want a strong shading effect visible, especially due to the area where this part of the model is. It's quite dark there, so you want high contrast. Next, I added 2 parts white to this mixture, and I repeated the process, just now using it as more like an extreme edge highlight. Just the most visible parts get this thin line of paint. Next, I started on the metallics, and I decided to go for 2 tones of metallic, and I wanted a really dark one, so I took metallic black and I added in black in a 2:1 ratio, 2 parts metallic black and 1 part black. And I started painting in all the dark metallic areas. Once those parts are painted in, I took gunmetal and I blocked in all the other metallic parts. So, meaning the parts that I didn't want the really darkest metal. I used it on the little rims on the helmet and on the wristbands, on the syringes on his back, the little rings hanging on his body and his dress, basically everywhere. Once that's done, I took anthracite gray and I painted the stitches with it. I didn't want to put a lot of time into this, so I just left it anthracite gray. And obviously you can wash and highlight it, but I didn't feel the need for it. I took gnome oil and I now washed all the metallic parts, the darker and the lighter ones. And as you'll see in a bit, once that's dry, the black metallic mixture turned really, really dark now. Where the other one would just look like a shaded metallic. And I took steel and I used this as an extreme edge highlight on the dark metallic parts. Just go thin coat over the edge and basically it's done. Especially for races like Eldar and these Drukhari, the more darker, sinister races. I like this really dark metallic style. It's really simple to apply. Then I took gunmetal and I highlighted the lighter metallic parts. Just work your way towards the light areas and make sure you leave a little bit of the shading visible. Once that's done, I took silver and I reinforced this previous layer, working towards the outer edges. Be careful with silver not to spill over. Metallics are always nasty if you spill them over. They're hard to remove. Most of the time it ends up in repainting parts. So with metallics done, I took ghost gray and I painted in this as a drug bag. Let's call it a drug bag. I did this into 2 coats. It's only to act as a base for the dead white I put on afterwards. The white you can apply in 2 or 3 coats until you're happy with the coverage. I applied 2 coats. Once the white has been applied, I took Warlord purple and I painted in the fluid. When you paint in the fluid, check the angle of your base and try and keep a straight line between the most upper point of the fluid and the base. So it actually looks like it's horizontal. It's a fluid, so it will move inside the bag or container it's in. I then made a mixture of 1 part Warlord purple and 1 part squid pink, and I just gave it a rough highlight. I then took the Warlord purple and thinned it down with a bit of water to a nice wash consistency I liked, and I washed that with cable that goes from the bag into the back of the rack. And that was to give the cable the effect, to have the appearance there's some fluid in there. Then I took pure squid pink and I applied the next highlight to the fluids in the bag. Using Sig Green, I now roughly painted some green around the holes in the face mask. You don't need to be really super precise in this. Stay a bit on the bottom of the little holes, and if you go in a bit too much towards the bottom and get close to the next one, it's not that big of a deal. This is more like a starting out color and making a layout sketch for the rest of the work we're going to do here. I then took livery green, and a bit more precise now. I reinforced the thick green from the previous layer, working towards the holes of the helmet. And as you can see, still I'm not that fast, it's not super precise. Once that's done, I take that white, and now I'm going to paint thin lines on the bottom of every hole. Next I took the livery green again, and I thinned it down with water. And now I go over all these little white areas. It doesn't really matter if you go into the darker areas. I thinned it down so far that it doesn't really have a lot of effect on the darker areas. And if it has a little bit of effect, it's absolutely not going to disturb anybody. You're going to have to look really close to see that. Will make a small transition in the color on the darker areas, where it will make a huge difference on the white areas, as you can see. And this creates a nice green glow on the helmet. And next I went back to the dead white, and I just gently brushed over the cable to get a bit of the white on the outer edges back. Still till this point I'm not really sure about that cable, but I figured I'll leave it at this for now. Maybe I'll change it later, I don't know yet. So I wanted some blood effect on the blades, and I wanted to start off with a bit of dried blood. So I took blood for the blood clot and a bit of charred blood, and I mixed it up. You can use black for this as well. By making it a bit darker, it will appear more dry later on. I applied this in a rough and streaking manner, so it looks like the blood has been slashed on the blade. And I repeated this on the other blade as well. Then I took some pure blood for the blood clot, and just on the tip of the blade, and I applied a little bit of it to make an appearance that there's still a bit of more fresher blood there. And that basically finishes up this model. I finished up the base, and I applied a little bit of gloss varnish to the back, the drug back on the back of the rack. So, I hope you liked this video. Please like, share and subscribe if you want to. Dislike if you want to as well, but please be kind enough to let me know what you didn't like about the video, so I can improve on that. Again, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.